Paid mods. A space game where you can't even land your ship on a planet without going through a cutscene. Broken ports. Emphasis on scale rather than detail. Remaster after remaster and making the loyal fans pay for it. Stupid dancing alien people. Game-breaking bugs. Decades between games.
Really dumb. Dancing alien people!
Bethesda's reputation is a shell of its former self. In the words of Friedrich Nietzsche, Bethesda is dead, and Todd Howard killed him.
Down the flat, we'll have a little field.
Be the alfalfa for the rabbits.
The rabbits.
And I get to tend the rabbits.
That actually happened. Okay, that may be an exaggeration, but let's talk about the downfall of Bethesda. With the Fallout show bringing so much attention to the franchise right now, and Bethesda as a whole, I have to utilize the time to make a video relating to these topics, so hopefully I can hit the algorithm, and I'm hoping...
All of this just works.
Sorry, I had to. So let's get into it. It's no secret that Bethesda's reputation has been on a decline over the past decade. Back in the 2000s and early 2010s, Bethesda was viewed as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, game developer in the business. Then some stuff happened, and we got to where Bethesda is today, and that is a typical, greedy and incompetent studio. But where did this fall happen? How did Bethesda go from an angel to a demon? Well, the answer most people would give would be Fallout 76, since this was, without a doubt, their most hated game at launch. Fallout 76 missed the mark, I won't argue there, but I would say Bethesda started declining earlier. You can also find plenty of forum posts and videos discussing the downfall of Bethesda well before Fallout 76. So where did the downfall for Bethesda begin?
Okay, so the line is somewhere between
Morrowind
and
Fallout 76.
Where exactly is the line? Exactly.
Let's move on to the next obvious contender, Fallout 4. I am going to spend a little bit more time on this because Fallout 4 is a mixed bag, and there is no game from Bethesda that I have such divided feelings for. Just to give you guys a little bit of backstory on my history with Fallout 4, I remember grinding out Fallout 3 in the summer of 2014, and I love that game, and it was my third Bethesda RPG after Skyrim and Oblivion. I was so excited for Fallout 4, and I remember I bought a bag of chips that I reserved specifically for the E3 demonstration, and I was initially blown away by what I was seeing in Fallout 4. I bought the game on Steam and started downloading it the day before launch so I could get my hands on it immediately. I remember being in the 7th grade and waking up at 5 AM so I could play Fallout 4 for 2 hours before I would have to go to school. For that entire school year, the only game I was really playing was Fallout 4. So before we rip into Fallout 4, let's give the game its flowers. Fallout 4 made some monumental improvements over the previous Fallout games, especially when it came to systems like power armor, settlements, and customization as a whole. The environmental storytelling that is Bethesda's signature was also there in Fallout 4, and the diversity of landscapes was also incredible. Yes, some parts were a bit repetitive, but I appreciate the art direction and them trying to add some more vibrance to this world. Even though the graphics are far from the best, I mean they aren't even good for the time, with older games looking substantially better, I still appreciate the attempt to make the most out of Fallout 4's world. And how could I not mention the amazing score by Enon Zur? I also love all of the small details, like the raiders backing off when you get to Swan's area. I know people give it flack, but they at least tried to give a memorable main story, and some of the quests were actually really cool. I still remember the quest where you go through Kellogg's memories, and I think this is one of the coolest quests Bethesda has ever made. There were also some other obvious upgrades, like the graphics being better, there were a lot more voice actors, and the combat felt 1,000 times better. Although when it comes to guns, revolvers don't eject casings.
I'm not giving you shot.
But what can you expect from a company that designs nightclubs like this and puts these intergalactic heathen demons in the middle of it all? But these are expected improvements with the bigger budget and newer consoles Fallout 4 was released on when compared to prior BGS games, so I won't count these as true innovations. Now let's move on to the downsides of Fallout 4. For as much thought that went into settlements, power armor, and unique landscapes, it appears that an equal but opposite amount of thought went into the quests, immersion, and choices as a whole. Bethesda was getting some pushback for their games not being true RPGs or not being that immersive before Fallout 4 even came out. But holy shit, Fallout 4 takes the lack of immersion to a new level. And keep in mind, I'm not saying that Fallout 4 is not immersive at all. I do think Fallout 4 has its immersive moments, but compared to the other games and how immersive it could have been, Fallout 4 comes up short. Exhibit A, the dialogue. You get 4 dialogue options when doing a quest, but the game forces you down to just 2 choices in most quests. And these choices seem to have barely any repercussions in the world. The removal of the karma system clearly shows that Bethesda didn't want to give that much time to think about the differing choices and how that would affect characters in the game. And as a result of this, most of the characters in Fallout 4 don't feel alive, since your choices don't impact how they interact with you. Also, the quests in themselves are basic and bland. The overwhelming majority of quests are just go here, fetch this, come back, and I'll give you 500 bottle caps. There is barely any variety or nuance to most of the quests in Fallout 4. The DLCs solve this by giving you interesting content outside of the main story. But I'm not going to count this since the base game should have already had enough content for this to not be an issue in the first place. Another indication of the lack of immersion came from the decision to have a voiced protagonist. I appreciate the fact that Bethesda was trying to innovate, and it seems like they wanted Fallout 4 to draw off other amazing storytelling games like Mass Effect. But they didn't even give you the choice to not have a voice protagonist. The other issues with the voice protagonist is that it goes against the voice in your head of the character, and so you don't feel as if the character you are playing is a direct representation of you. This just makes the experience of Fallout 4 less immersive as a whole, but please don't discredit the voice actors because I do think they did a great job even if Bethesda went in the wrong direction. I could see the argument though for this being more immersive since it doesn't feel like the interactions are one-way conversations. It's a matter of preference, and I just wish Bethesda gave us the choice to not have this. As someone who prefers the voiceless protagonist, I'm happy they went back to that in Starfield, so I won't knock Bethesda too hard for this. Since it was an attempt to innovate that just didn't completely work out for them, but I still respect their effort. Even the intro of Fallout 4, which I don't think is bad by any means, displays how the game is inherently against role-playing and you making your own character. Bethesda is the most comfortable it's ever been filling in your backstory. Your character is a veteran, happily married, and has a child. Compare this to the other games in the franchise, and we can see that Bethesda forces your hand a lot more in Fallout 4, and it gives you less liberty to craft your own backstory. That usual minimal level of backstory is missing from Fallout 4. These are not necessarily bad decisions, since I do think the main story of Fallout 4 is better than Fallout 3, but it just shows how Bethesda wanted to do less when it came to the immersive, role-playing element of the game. Combining these unusual oversights with the usual oversights, like constant bugs and glitches, and you can see why many people had some disdain for Fallout 4. It seems as though Bethesda thought that the settlement building and weapon customization would be enough to make us happy and content with the game, and this led to a serious lack of attention given to the writing and quests, which are the most important parts of any Fallout game, in my opinion. So my conclusion on Fallout 4 is that it was a very good game by normal standards, but it was not a great game by Bethesda standards. This makes Fallout 4 stand out all the more, since the rest of Bethesda's catalog until this point was virtually spotless. It's like if the kid who always gets 95s or 100s suddenly gets an 85 on his test. It's not a terrible grade, but you know he could have done better.
You need to do better.
But here is where we are going to get a little more controversial, because I believe that many of these problems existed before Fallout 4, and Fallout 4 was just the straw that broke the camel's back, since it crossed the line of what was acceptable. Bethesda's games were deteriorating in many ways before Fallout 4, but these subtle downgrades usually went unnoticed. Now before we get into this, I want to preface this by saying that I know it's become more popular as of recently to claim that Bethesda was never great and that their games were never really special. With all due respect, if that is what you genuinely believe, then you are just a hater, my guy. There is a difference between being critical and just being a downright hater. And lately, a lot of haters disguise their blatant hate in impossible standards by just saying they are being critical. But here is the undeniable truth about Bethesda. They did an amazing job of compromising between traditional RPGs and adventure games. When you look at Morrowind and Oblivion, for the time especially, these games were absolute masterpieces. These two games are, in my opinion, the pinnacle of Bethesda. The creativity, writing, and quests are all on point here. Yes, the games have some flaws. The AI is a bit wonky, the combat is dull, and the decision to implement fast travel in Oblivion makes you less willing to just explore the world. And of course, the games are buggy like every Bethesda game. But these issues cannot outweigh the sheer amount of positives of these games. And as always, the soundtrack from Jeremy Soule is just chef's kiss. Moving on to Fallout 3, I get that it has become popular to diss this game. And yes, New Vegas is the best Fallout game by far, and yes, it's dumb that Bethesda doesn't just let Obsidian make more Fallout games. Don't get me started on the ridiculously bad ending of Fallout 3. The whole ending was ruined by a fairly obvious oversight in the writing. They then fix their mistake, but then in typical fashion, they make a DLC out of it and charge you for it.
Like, if you're a broke boy, just say so.
But here's the thing. Fallout 3, especially for the time, was an incredible game. It did an amazing job of bridging the gap between the older games and modern audiences by giving you a modern take on the series. Fallout 3 gave us the format that would allow New Vegas to flourish. And so if you love New Vegas like I do, then you have to give Fallout 3 some serious respect. I will admit, the writing in Fallout 3 is not as good as the older Fallout games, or even Morrowind or Oblivion for that matter, but it's not bad by any means. But like with other Bethesda games, Fallout 3's world and atmosphere is incredible. The environmental storytelling is there, and I love the various ways you can impact the world. Again, the game is not perfect, and it has some flaws, but it's still a damn good game, especially for the time. Now we move on to the game, what is most people's introduction to Bethesda, and that includes me, Skyrim. Skyrim is an amazing game, and for the sake of time, I won't list all of the positives. I can't emphasize this enough, but when we look at these games, we have to consider the time they were released, and for the time, Skyrim was an absolute masterpiece. Skyrim has one of the best worlds in all of gaming, and the world building in this game, especially for 2011, is remarkable. There are so many things that Skyrim does incredibly well, and the game really set a new standard that paved the way for so many open world games to come. If I sat here and listed the positives of Skyrim, then we would be here all day, but I have made videos in the past talking about my love of this game. I have played so much Skyrim in my childhood and throughout the years, and I have more experience with this game than any other Bethesda game. So don't come at me when I get to this next part and call me a Skyrim hater. The issue with Skyrim is this little shit right here.
Do you get to the Cloud District very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't.
Why are you the way that you are?
He looks up, you can put it on the board! Yes!
That was my attempt to instigate and overstimulate, to appease the TikTok brain rot, to not really tell you what I mean, but to instead give you a burst of dopamine. Okay, I'm done talking like Moist Critical now. Here is my real issue with Skyrim. This is going to be a hot take that people are going to get mad at me for, but Skyrim is not that immersive. I love this game to bits, but it lacks substantial immersion, and you notice it the more you play. And what do I mean by immersion? For me, immersion is about the depth of the world. How intertwined are all of the elements in the game? Does it feel alive? Does it feel like my choices actually make an impact on the world? Skyrim is a beautiful and extremely fun game, don't get me wrong, and it gives you glimpses of immersion by giving you special interactions from time to time. But that feeling of my choices actually making an impact and everything having a greater depth to it by being woven through one reactive world, that is where Skyrim lacks. You can find some great videos that expand on this, and as much as I hate to acknowledge it, this is the single most area where Skyrim needs improvement. The only choice that seems to have a ripple effect in the entire game, keep in mind I'm not including the DLC, is if you decide to go against Cicero when he needs help with his carriage. If you don't help him and report him to the patrolling guard, then he will kill Vantis Lorius and his wife, and have a bad image of you if you join the Dark Brotherhood. This is a good trickle-down effect that actually shows a choice having consequences. I just wish Skyrim had more of these. I know I'm going to get some detractors in the comments, but we have to look at the game honestly and past the superficial beauty and pure joy of Skyrim. Skyrim is an incredible game, but it has some issues, and these oversights got amplified in Fallout 4. The main issue with Skyrim is the lack of immersion, and the game just doesn't feel deep. Morrowind and Oblivion I can give some leeway, since those games are much older than Skyrim. And let me make it clear that I view Oblivion and Morrowind as immersive games. I even view Fallout 3 as immersive, despite the weakness of the writing, especially in the main quest. And I guess doors are a weakness too. I do find Skyrim less immersive though, and I am disappointed that they didn't make any improvements in the depth of the world and consequences of your actions when compared to the other games. In fact, it feels like Skyrim takes a step back in some areas. The writing in Skyrim is weaker than Oblivion and Morrowind, and some of your choices feel like they have no impact on the world. The classic example I always give is the Emperor being assassinated in the Dark Brotherhood storyline, and this literally having no effect on the world. I can give a few other examples of this lack of immersion. Your choice at the beginning of the game between Hadvar and Ralof has no impact on your standing with the Legion and the Stormcloaks. Speaking of the Legion and the Stormcloaks, the conflict is so watered down and there is no nuance. The choice is literally between being a racist if you join the Stormcloaks or being against a religion if you join the Imperials. There is no substantial ethical conflict here, and this is generally the case with most storylines in Skyrim. Have to give credit to Fallout 4, it at least tried to give you a tough ethical dilemma. The Civil War also barely feels alive in the game, and you can really only fix this with mods. I know there are reports that Bethesda wanted to have giant random battles happening around the province, but due to technical limitations at the time, they couldn't make this happen. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt there, but in other areas, the Civil War still feels non-existent. The NPCs never really talk about this life-shattering event, and we don't really see any substantial hurdles this Civil War places on anyone's lives in Skyrim. The only showcase of the Civil War is in the forts held by either side or the guards' outfits in the cities they control. Even after you join a side and win, there are barely any changes to the landscape. The only changes are with a few Jarls and guards becoming either Imperials or Stormcloaks. It's also incredibly strange that while this civil war is happening, no one is acknowledging the literal end of the world with Alduin. It is also weird that neither side asked the Dragonborn for his help, and even if you accomplish everything in the game and then join one of the two factions, they will not know who you are and will feel the need to test you. The Civil War in Skyrim is just unpolished, and it only feels like a superficial conflict made for content to create a questline. It is just strange the more you think about it. And this is just one questline. I could go on about the other factions, but for the sake of time, I won't. On the surface though, Skyrim gives you some levels of immersion. You will occasionally get letters from secret people watching you in the shadows, and the guards will make remarks that go off previous events. But that doesn't make up for the lack of impact your choices should make in some key areas. I'm not saying that Skyrim has to have as many outcomes and trickle-down choices as dedicated decision-making games, but the game should have had more nuance when it came to the possibilities of the world and how your choices shape it. It seems like Bethesda is scared of players going off the beaten path, and so they try to minimize these decision-making offshoots by making your choices only matter in a quest, but not in the world. This way, they don't have to bother writing out different scenarios in the world and how each choice you make will impact the game and create a different variation of the world. This means less labor for them, but it also makes the games feel less reactive and as a result, less immersive as a whole. The choices in Skyrim feel painstakingly linear, and sometimes it feels like join the faction and do its quest, or just act like it doesn't exist and never bother to interact with it. On top of this, I mentioned this with the Civil War, but there is not a single, meaningful, difficult choice in Skyrim. Whatever choices the game presents you with are incredibly simple, and it's usually just do you want to be a bad guy or a good guy. That morally gray component that actually makes you contemplate a choice is totally absent from Skyrim. It's a shame, because Bethesda has had decent choices in the past, so we know they are capable of writing good scenarios. It just seems to be a thing where they thought, hey, we don't have to try as hard on the writing and we can still get by with it. Work smarter, not harder, right? Well, they went too far, and the drop-off in the writing between Bethesda's games is extremely apparent. The only somewhat tough choice in the game I could think of was whether to side with Sadia or Kamatu, and even then, this choice is only tough because you don't know who is telling the truth. It's not an ethical dilemma, and there are no actual tough choices in Skyrim that call for introspection. They also tried to make there be a tough choice in regards to killing Pertinax, since he has some war crimes to his name despite helping the Dragonborn defeat Alduin, so I guess they at least tried. But let's be honest, everyone chooses to spare him, so is it really a tough choice? The only area where Skyrim seems to have a 50-50 split is whether to side with the Imperials or Stormcloaks, which would indicate it's a tough choice on the surface. But here is the thing. 90% of people who choose Stormcloak choose it because you remember the Imperials putting your head on the chopping block despite you not being on the list.
You know what? You just made the list!
Or you're just playing a Nord. Those are the two overwhelming factors that would make someone choose Stormcloak. The issue here is that this choice is not truly ideological. You are not debating which side is actually better for Skyrim. Instead, the only way Skyrim gets you to second guess yourself about your choice is by setting you up with a bias against the Imperials from the start of the game. It's a shame, since this is clearly an area where Bethesda could have actually given you a tough choice that actually has a massive effect on the province. But instead, the dilemma is watered down, and the outcomes of either side are barely present in the game. Don't get me wrong, the world building in Skyrim is fantastic. It's right up there with Oblivion and Morrowind, and even if you think those games did it better, then Skyrim is not too far behind. However, the malleability of that world, in other words, how your choices shape the world or the game, that is where Skyrim falls flat. These critiques that I am making about the lack of substantial choices or a reactive world were completely possible to address during the development of this game. After all, the writing and immersion is what made a game like New Vegas immortal. When it comes to the average Joe who is only going to play through the games once, then you'll never notice Skyrim or Fallout 4's pitfalls in the immersion department. But for those of us who are going to invest more time into the game, we'll pick up on these areas over time. The reason why a game like New Vegas is so revered is because we know how deep it goes. Sadly though, why would Bethesda bother appealing to fans like us when the casual gamer is where the money is? It feels like we're not going to get the ultra immersive RPGs from Bethesda anytime soon, and from a business standpoint, can we really blame them? But going back to Skyrim and Fallout 4, the lack of nuance and immersion in Skyrim are what set up Fallout 4 for its biggest negatives. It seems as though the rest of Skyrim was so flawless that these issues got swept under the rug, and this enabled Bethesda to think it was okay to not prioritize the writing and instead focus purely on scale. Dare I say, Fallout 4's drop in quality was
rigged from the start.
And of course, this focus on scale rather than detail is what killed Starfield. What's rotting Bethesda is the attention to detail, or lack thereof. They seem to be forgetting that the smaller, handcrafted world with loads of intricacies is what made them successful and what distinguishes their games. It seems like Bethesda thinks we are a lot dumber than we actually are, and they think settlements and customization alone will be enough to satisfy us. And Fallout 4, and Starfield are a testament to this. Over time, there was less emphasis placed on detail until it reached a breaking point. Hopefully Starfield is a wake-up call for Bethesda, because if they continue on this trajectory, then one of, if not the most hyped game ever, will crumble. Of course, we can't forget about the recent greed tactics like the monetized mods and the countless amounts of remasters and new versions of their games. Mods are some of the best parts of Bethesda's games, and their support of them was a huge factor in what made them so likable to the community. But now Bethesda has let their greed sink in, and they decided to go in on the cheap opportunity for a quick buck with the Creation Club. If you want to go for relatively easy money without having to put in a bunch of effort, then there are much more respectable ways to go about this. Let Obsidian make a Fallout game, or remake Morrowind or Oblivion, since half the labor is already done on those games. But instead, Bethesda is chasing after the lesser rewarding path with the least resistance, and this is also showing in their game design, as the shortcuts and lack of depth become clearer and clearer. I also want to say that despite me critiquing these games today, I have genuinely enjoyed every BGS game since Morrowind, with the exception of Starfield. I haven't played the games before Morrowind, so I can't talk about those, but I have enjoyed the overwhelming majority of Bethesda's catalog. Even if I don't agree with all of their choices, I still have to acknowledge how great Skyrim and Fallout 4 were. I have some disagreements on their directions of these games, but I still had a blast playing them. Starfield, I can say without a doubt, is not for me, and I have never played Fallout 76, so I can't talk about that. When it comes to everything between Morrowind and Fallout 4, even though I think there was a subtle degradation of quality between those games, I still thoroughly enjoyed each of them. When it comes to Bethesda and Todd Howard, we have to put some serious respect on their names. Todd Howard is, without a doubt, one of the greatest game developers to ever live. You can hate as much as you want on Bethesda, but you cannot deny the fact that they were completely revolutionary, especially back in the day. And when it comes to the recent misses by them, yes, I am disappointed, but I'm calling this out because I love and care about this company. A lot of artists try to innovate over and over again, and every time you try to set a new standard in an industry, you are taking a risk. Sometimes those risks work, and sometimes they don't. So while Bethesda has been declining over the past decade especially, here's to hoping that the company that I deeply love and want to succeed can rise again. But that's just my take on Bethesda and their downfall from greatness. Let me know what you think about Bethesda in the comments below, and if you think Elder Scrolls 6 will succeed, or will Bethesda continue to be incompetent and not listen to the community's complaints. In summary, Bethesda tested the limits on how much detail was necessary for their games, and as a result of this, their newer games are seriously lacking in the detail that made their older games so successful. But hopefully videos like this help steer Bethesda back in the right direction. And I hope Bethesda becomes one of the few companies that improves on its mistakes and doesn't bend to corporate greed, although the countless Skyrim versions and Creation Club are not helping combat this image. Let's make Bethesda great again, or at least try to. It's the least we can do to a company that brought us so much joy when we were younger. But despite our warnings, it's ultimately up to Bethesda to listen, and when it comes to greed never changes.